Hi, I'm Raina Bondy from Pyramid US, and I'm here today with Dr. Andy Bondy, President and co-founder of Pyramid Educational Consultants. Dr. Bondy is an innovative leader in the field of autism and applied behavior analysis. He developed the Picture Exchange Communication System, PECS, with Lori Frost over 30 years ago. Today, PECS is an evidence-based practice used with learners around the world. He also wrote The Pyramid Approach to Education, a training manual that offers an integrated orientation to developing effective educational environments, blending applied behavior analysis with functional activities and creative communication strategies. Dr. Bondy has presented numerous papers, lectures, and workshops in regional, national, and international conferences and conventions. He remains active in research and writing and continues to develop new and innovative methods of helping children with autism and related developmental disorders. Welcome, Andy.
Hi, Raina.
We are so grateful to be joined by Dr. Beth Sulzer-Azaroff today. Dr. Sulzer-Azaroff is internationally recognized for her pioneering work in the field of applied behavior analysis. Her work was instrumental in translating findings from the basic behavior analytic laboratory to the applied setting. She is perhaps most recognized for the development of strategies to enhance learning and quality of life for individuals with developmental disabilities, and for her contributions to the field of organizational behavior management. The products of her individual and collaborative efforts have included more than a dozen books and over 100 published papers. Dr. Sulzer-Azaroff has presented extensively at regional, national, and international conferences and has received substantial research and training grant funding. Through her research, teaching, textbooks, and the work of her academic progeny, she has improved the lives of children, adults, families, and workers throughout the world. Andy and Beth have known each other for many years and have collaborated on numerous projects, books, and journal articles. We're thrilled to have them here today to discuss their work. Joining Beth at her home in Naples, Florida, is Pyramid consultant Joanne Matteo. Thank you both for being with us today.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the first question for you, Beth. You began your career in public education before pursuing your doctoral studies at the University of Minnesota. What drew you to the field of behavior analysis?
My teaching job, my initial teaching job, was in an inner city school in New York City. And I went into that school, first graders, and the children were climbing the desks and running around and misbehaving in every way imaginable. I had no idea that that could go on in a classroom, and I had no knowledge about how to deal with it. So what I said is, everybody sit down. And it didn't work. And then I said it a little louder. It didn't work. Finally, I think I screamed, and that worked. And they sat down for about a minute or two. And then it started all over again. Well, this is a slight exaggeration, but the fact was that I was simply unprepared to manage and motivate the children. They came from very different backgrounds from mine. And all I knew was to shout at them. And of course, I got immediate reinforcement, but not very long lasting. That was not satisfying. So I started looking for something else.
Andy, you earned your PhD from the UNC Greensboro and completed your internship at the University of Kansas. Who were your mentors and influences in the early stages of your education and career?
Well, when I was at Greensboro, the program I entered was in the process of getting American Psychological Association approval in clinical psychology, but they didn't have it when I arrived. So essentially, I had to do everything to get a degree in experimental psychology as well as a degree in clinical psychology. So I literally worked in a clinic and ran back to the lab and changed the pigeon and went back to the clinic and worked with more kids. So on the clinical side, my mentors were Marilyn Erickson and Rosemary Nelson were major influences on teaching me how to work with kids and adults. On the experimental side, there was Aaron Brownstein and Rick Scholl, and they taught me about experimental analysis of behavior. In some sense, they taught me how to think about problems, and on the clinical side, I learned how to apply what I'm thinking about. So it was kind of a unique graduate school experience. And then after I got my PhD, I did a postdoc in the University of Kansas Medical Center. And there, Carl Altman was my significant advisor there. And that's where I had my sort of most direct exposure to working with kids with autism and related disabilities. And again, trying to work with teaching staff how to work with kids and families how to work with kids. So my clinical experience just really grew tremendously that year.
So Beth, before serving on the faculty for decades at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, your first faculty appointment was at Southern Illinois University. Who were your mentors and influences in the early stages of your education and career?
Well, the first influence, the main influence in my career and in my life was my husband, Ed Sulzer. Ed went to the graduate school at Columbia University in New York. And at the time I was teaching, as I described, and he took a class with Fred Keller. And he would come home and tell me what Fred Keller had to say. And through that experience, we certainly exchanged information about what he was learning. And we both became very closely informed about Skinner and B.F. Skinner and his work and the work he had been doing. Interestingly enough, this is a side note, but shows you how convinced we were. I was pregnant at the time with our first child. Ed had been in contact, as I say, with Keller, who was in contact with another set of parents who were using what was then called a Skinner box. And there was an article written about baby in a box. Bottom line is we got that particular one when they were finished with it. And our first child, David, used this box, which was climate controlled, as his first crib. And of course, that's why he's such a genius today.
Very interesting.
So what else shall I say?
No, but interesting dinner conversation when you're husband.
Yeah, we did. And that really, well, of course, then at that point, as he was telling me about behavior analysis, and I began to use the procedures in my classroom, primarily positive reinforcement. And by golly, it worked like magic. Yelling at the kid who misbehaved, I would go and tap on the shoulder or say nice work or whatever, and the whole world changed for all of us. The kids started loving school. I started loving teaching. The children started to learn and thrive, and that was it. That grabbed me, and it has held on to me throughout my life.
Yeah.
And of course, even with my own children, who are perfect, I have 3 of them. Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Andy, when did you first discover behavior analysis and what attracted you to the field?
Well, I grew up in New York City, and my parents liked to get me out of the city during the summers to camp situations. And one summer I worked in a camp with children with emotional disturbance. And it was fascinating for me. I was trying to figure out why they were doing what they were doing. It didn't seem random, it seemed wise, but I didn't have a way to sort of systematically help. So I switched from being a physics major to a psychology major, and I was very lucky at Stony Brook to be able to walk into a behaviorally oriented program which kind of fit my physics background. And I started working in a after-school program for kids with autism, being mentored by Robin Winkler, while being able to take courses at Stony Brook with Howard Racklin and some other, wonderful thinkers. So that was my exposure to behavior analysis. I got to talk with Robin Winkler, several times a week about what was going on in the classrooms. And although he wasn't sort of an expert in autism, he understood the principles, so we could sit there and think about how to teach particular skills and break down lessons into great detail. And it was from the experience at Stony Brook that led me to find the program in Greensboro, which was also very behaviorally oriented.
So Beth, you were one of a small group of investigators who recognized the clinical implications of behavior analysis and founded the field of applied behavior analysis. Experience early on as a woman in a male-dominated field, and how has that changed over the years?
It sure did change. Now, I do have to say, as implied in my earlier comments, that Ed was very, very supportive of my husband. And I learned a tremendous amount from him. When he finished at Columbia, we moved to Syracuse, where he was on the faculty at the medical school, the SUNY Upstate Medical School. And I took a couple of courses there that were peripherally related. 2 years and 2 children later, we moved to Minnesota. Now, people in the field of psychology at that time called it the hotbed of empiricism. The University of Minnesota was so significant was that B.F. Skinner had started his teaching career there, and he influenced a lot of the people on the faculty. The one probably that I got the most influence from Ken McCorkadale, and I was his teaching assistant, and he used Skinner's book as his textbook. So that gave me more of a background in formal behavior analysis. Also, Bob Orlando had come from the University of Washington, where he had interacted. It was a small group of people at that time who were focused on children and learning. And Bob ran a seminar and started reading. The JABA had just come out. The Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis had just come out. And what we did is we read articles in that journal and in other journals and had discussions about them. And this small cadre of people, also Travis Thompson, Ed being on the faculty, began to grow into a fairly unified adherence to applied behavior analysis. A couple of years into our residence in Minnesota, Ed and Travis Thompson and some of the other people, the first meeting that I knew of behavior analysts, and that was in the mid-60s, before JABA came out, probably around 65, 66, something like that. And that meeting brought all the leaders in the field. They'd Asrin, all the people that were doing wonderful things, and that really inspired me. So I kept going in that direction. We'll get to that later.
So it doesn't seem like it was that difficult in the male-dominated world at the time for you. Yeah.
Well, to respond to that, I have a little story.
Okay.
There I going back to graduate school, and my children, my boys, were 1 and 3 at the time. And I went to the medical exam, and you went like you were on an assembly line.
Mm-hmm.
And the first lady I came to looked at me, looked at my record. She says, "You're a mother, you have 2 children." She said, "What are you doing in graduate school? Go home and take care of your children." I thought, oh my God, I'm going to wreck my children. How terrible. Then we went to the next station, and there was another woman, and along the wall were pictures of little kids. I said, "Are those yours?" She said, "Yes." So I told her what had happened. She said, "Don't pay any attention." But that was pretty much the zeitgeist at that time. We're talking early 60s. And I got a lot of grief for daring to leave my children at home. And I was going to do dreadful things to them.
Yeah.
But if we have time, I'll tell you about my kids.
Okay. That's wonderful.
PECS was developed in a public school system for children with autism in 1985 by you and Lori Frost, and was first implemented with preschool students diagnosed with autism at the Delaware Autism Program. How did your background in applied behavior analysis inform the development of PECS?
Well, it would be nice to think that, Lori and I sat in a room and kind of go, oh, we need a new communication system and map one out. The real world is, not like that at all. We essentially did some problem solving with a little boy that Lori was working with who did not vocally imitate, would not imitate signs, was trouble pointing to pictures, he tapped on things and slapped things. So Lori said, come work with me, and we sat there and we just started trying things. And I think I suggested, well, let's count out one picture because, instead of making a choice, let's just work on one. And then we were sitting there, and instead of having him touch it, I was sitting there and I said, well, I helped him pick it up and put it in her hand. And I knew enough about, shaping and fading and get rid of problems. And I backed off very quickly, and he kept giving the card to Lori, and we're looking at each other going, whoa, he's actually doing something to her. And what we realized was it was important that he was giving her the picture, not putting the picture on the item. It wasn't about the picture of the item. It was that do something to that other person. And Lori's a very creative person. She took that first little experience and tried it out with a few other kids. We started seeing 2 people involved in the lesson, really helped separate who was going to do the physical prompting, who would do the reinforcer. And as soon as we separated the roles, we really found the acquisition of that initial exchange much quicker. And then, we had to put on more pictures, and my background on how to teach discrimination started to seep into that. And Lori comes to the office one day and kind of went, well, I need a little sentence. So, he's having to put 2 different pictures on a thing that we're handing over. And like, well, what is that called? Oh, and we had to come up with a name and how to teach it. And so again, it was like Lori would come up with an innovative thing to do, and then I would sit there and try to figure out what's the most effective teaching strategy for these skills. And then you really only learn about something deeply when you have to start teaching other people about it. First the staff, and then people that would come in, and then going to a conference. And it's like, whoa, let's call that phase 1. I mean, it's just like, it's not like we thought of business phase 1 and we'll have to build more. It's really the opposite. The kids are teaching us how to expand their communication skills. That's where we saw different steps to try to identify the teaching strategies and the sequence for other people.
I also love the collaboration between the clinical psychology world and the speech and language world to come up with what you guys did based on your students. So what interested you in the pyramid approach to education and working with Andy and Lori?
Well, I think I heard Andy speak at a conference. We had a number of colleagues in common. I think there was literature that was shared. Actually the event, Todd was your student, and he said, he told me he was working with Andy at the time, and he was telling me about the program, and our meeting was in Washington, and he said, why don't you stop off on the way and come and visit? And so I did. I went to Baltimore and Delaware. Mm-hmm. I went to Delaware, sorry. And
far away.
We went and we saw the classes in action. If it works, I like it. That's what was going on. And I liked it because I could see these children getting what they wanted and doing what you wanted, and exchanging that back and forth. And they weren't kicking and screaming and self-stimming all over the place. But during that time, I had done a lot of work in the field of autism myself, and it was very impressive to me to see the structure and the learning that was going on. And that made me very interested. I figured Andy and Lori had to be geniuses, and they discovered something really valuable.
Well, I'm going to add a little from my experience that Beth was alluding to, that Todd Harris was a psychologist working for me. And, when he said, that Beth was his mentor, he was like, I was tongue-tied, like, Beth. And, I couldn't believe it. So I just kept saying, would she come? Would she come and visit us? And I was just so amazed that she was so wonderful, Beth, that you were so wonderful with your time that you came to see us, and everyone in the program was running around like, can you believe who's coming?
Dignitary.
We were just so thrilled, and she was not only kind, insightful, and helped us. And I think that is also what led us to not only talking about how to work with the kids, but that the key to working with kids is well-trained staff. So we started shifting our attention from essentially, what are the kids doing within the PECS protocol, to how do you get teachers and speech pathologists and psychologists who have behavioral backgrounds or don't, and occupational therapists, everybody, how do you get them on board? And that's where working and talking to Beth, her background in staff development and organizational behavior management, I just felt that like, wow, gold was coming to me, and I'm just going to sit here and listen and interact with it. So it was wonderful.
Well, we clicked, I think.
Yeah.
I think that you had a background in the specialty and special ed that was superb. We had a common language and certainly a common perspective on learning and behavior.
Yeah.
That really pulled us together.
Sounds.
So I think that leads to my next question, which is what motivated you to develop the pyramid approach to education?
Well, the pyramid approach is essentially my way of organizing the principles in behavior analysis so that teams could use those principles and describe not only lessons, but sort of problem solving about the lessons in a common language. My concern was, again, we have special education teachers, we have speech pathologists, we have psychologists, we have school psychologists, and everyone has a different history, a different theory, and what I realized was, if I were to try to argue with everybody about my theory, then we just would sit there forever arguing theory. And the kids don't know anything about theory. The kids only know, what do you do with them? So if I could devise a method that would get people to be more specific about what they're doing, then the team could be doing the same thing, even if each member of the team is thinking about what they're doing in a different way. So it's much more concerned about, if you will, what the lesson looked like than the theoretical basis for each step within a particular lesson. And I had been working with Lori Frost, was a speech pathologist, and working with other speech pathologists and exposing him to Skinner's verbal behavior, which took time. And then trying to get everybody on board with, well, what are we teaching? Where are we going? How do we motivate kids? And essentially, my questions to staff became the basis of the pyramid model. That is, instead of trying to describe, here's how to teach, it was more, here are the critical questions we need to answer. So the pyramid is trying to get all the staff to ask a series of questions, essentially trying to say, I either trust your answer, but more than that, I trust your ability to test if it's a good answer. So this goes back to the heart of behavior analysis, which is collect data and analyze it. You don't know if it's a good lesson to after you tried it. You can think you're brilliant, but if the student didn't learn anything, then it wasn't a great lesson. So it became focused on getting everybody to ask questions, come up with answers, and evaluate whether their plans were good. And what we found was people really enjoyed buying into that kind of model because we just were not challenging all the theory. We were grounding it in actual interactions with kids.
I think that's key from a professional point of view, that you challenge us to think of what does it really look like. We all have the theory, we all have that information, but what does it look like with the students? And you held us you held them accountable for that and come up with other ideas as well to make sure that it worked. I love that. So your textbooks, Beth, such as Behavior Analysis for Lasting Change, Applying Behavior Analysis Across the Autism Spectrum, Who Killed My Daddy, a behavioral safety fable, have been widely used in colleges and universities throughout the country to train teachers, school administrative staff, psychologists, managers, and others in how the principles of behavior can be arranged to improve everyday functioning across, multiple settings. What do you consider your greatest professional success? And then I'm going to ask you what your biggest challenge is, but you can start with your greatest professional success.
Oh, goodness.
Long list.
It is. Well, what comes to mind are my students, my graduate students. And I think that's true of any college professor. When you see them not only learning and performing cognitively and answering quiz questions, but you see them bringing their data in week after week, show pictures and graphs of how their clients are improving. That's the big thrill.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And of course, bottom line kinds of things. One example is I taught a course on the internet for a couple of years, and one of my students who lived at quite a distance had an autistic child. He was about 3 years old. Well, bottom line, she and I worked together in those courses. She took everything she learned and more. That child has now graduated from high school, is in college, he's functioning, he will be an engineer or something else. Mm-hmm. But seeing him learn and grow, and the data, the hard data described, that kind of thing is the biggest thrill you can have.
I agree. Yeah. That's absolutely wonderful. What has been your biggest challenge?
Biggest challenge? Well, I think time has been my biggest challenge because I wanted to do it all. And then there are only 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
but somehow or another, I think I've managed to do a lot of the kinds of things that I find incredibly rewarding. Probably teaching graduate students and seeing them go out and the expansion of the field in the application, particularly in special ed, but also in the safety industry and all kinds of other areas of application. The principles work no matter where. You just have to find what you need to manage, what you can manage, and how you can do it ethically and effectively.
Excellent. Yeah, you've influenced a lot of people. Thank you.
PECS is currently used by individuals all over the world in over 20 languages, and Pyramid Educational Consultants has offices in 15 countries. What do you consider your greatest professional success?
Well, I think, sort of as Beth alludes, it's when you influence, both, adults who want to learn, what you've discovered and do more of it. So we have wonderful consultants around the world who are passionate and smart and incredibly hardworking and are willing to go, that extra step and make sure the quality of what they're doing from workshops to consultations is, just the best. So because of their hard work, what we started to develop years ago literally influences, many thousands of families and kids around the world. We do a lot of international flights and long, exhausting international flights, and people say, how do you keep flying? And essentially it's because when I land, you run into passionate people who take great care of us and want to know what we're doing and introduce us to families who are really excited about what their kids are doing. So that's where the motivation comes from, is trying to help staff figuring out how to be better so they can help families and ultimately help kids and adults get jobs and live in the real world.
And what's been your biggest challenge?
Well, as Beth says, it's that time issue, is how do you make sure that people are going to do what you've been talking about at that highest quality level. It is frustrating when people say, oh yeah, we do PECS, and they point to pictures on a wall, or, think that anything that involves pictures is PECS. And it's like, no, it's a very specific protocol about how to teach kids to use the pictures. There are many other uses of pictures. So there's been a lot of confusion about that. I think it's both, it's been exciting to have two fields, behavior analysis and speech pathology, work tightly together, but then you also get misunderstanding from both fields. So you have behavior analysts who think, well, speech pathology can't contribute, we know verbal behavior, and so you're trying to say, no, there's a lot that they can contribute, and you have speech pathologists who will sometimes say, no, we don't want to learn that behavior analysis stuff. So it's like, how do we get everyone to say, no, this is mutually beneficial? So that's been an interesting challenge, to try to get everybody to think it's not one or the other, that when we work together, we're much more effective for, kids and families and everybody.
If I may, I'm going to go back to a question that related a little earlier to PECS. You spearheaded an influential literature review concerning PECS several years ago. What did you learn that was the most surprising?
Well, it really wasn't surprising because I've seen it work in so many places. But the breadth and I guess what delighted me in doing that review was the many foci, the many areas that people found of interest and wanted to explore further. So there was this whole evolution of questions about the use of PECS, from the motoric, the physical, the visual, the theoretical. It was a very good learning experience, and I hope that that's continuing. I hope that that body of research and informing the use of PECS.
you can probably speak to that, Andy, when there's different research projects done on little parts of the protocol that people are interested in, such as the time delay in phase 4.
No, it's been exciting because, again, we knew as we were piecing it together, we were relying upon a lot of strategies that had not been applied to augmentative communication systems, whether it was pictures or other strategies. So in the manual that we published back in 2002, there were like suggestions like, if a child doesn't have a picture, then we would talk about how to use attributes to be able to describe something if a specific picture wasn't missing. And then several years later, Markle and Neef did a study on improvisation, essentially taking that little idea and showing that, kids can learn to use current repertoire to describe items which they don't have the specific picture. And then somebody else said, not only that, parents can learn to do that too at home. And so that kind of, sequential building, you have an idea and somebody tests the idea and then somebody expands the idea. That's what's been really exciting for me to take a look at the ongoing research. And I admit it's hard to keep up with because, Google searching in English doesn't do it. There are publications down over 20 different languages about PECS. And so, every couple of weeks they sit there on the computer trying to track down the next article from Pakistan to India to, China and trying to say, can I at least read the abstract? But again, what's been fascinating is, all of these to me are various, confirmations and expansions of ideas. I really haven't seen anything that kind of says, no, this really, is bad or has a negative impact on speech or communication. So to me, it's this expanding globe that's fascinating to watch.
So Beth, you've been very influential in many professional organizations, boards, including president of ABAI and Division 25 of the American Psychological Association, APA, and chair of the APA Board of Scientific Affairs and the Committee on Continuing Ed. What motivated you to get involved? Because that's a lot.
Maybe I just don't know how to say no.
Yeah, I don't know how to say no, probably.
But, there was a lot of pressure to. Fortunately, I think by the time the ABA presidency came along, my kids were of an age where they were more or less becoming independent, so that I could do that. But the pressure was great because there had not been a female president of any behavioral organization. There had been, I believe, Rosemary Nelson was a vice president of Division 25. I'm not sure, but I think so. But I don't think there had been a female in charge of any of the behavioral organizations. So, and a lot of the women came to me personally, and I felt I really owed it to my fellow women, and I enjoy doing it myself. It's pretty exciting when you can have an influence at that level on the development of a field, and that for ABA, for the scientific affairs, having input into the field of scientific psychology that was really thrilling. And the continuing education has always been my number one interest, and having that kind of an influence, those things were really exciting.
Well, it's your influence for, it started with your grad students, but when you're on all of these boards, it's people you don't even know that you're now influencing thousands and thousands of people.
The field of safety is a good example because there was practically no knowledge. There was a little bit, there were a few papers out, but they were so far away. School of Engineering is over there, and the School of Liberal is over there, and there the twains meet. And there is where it met, and that was fascinating. Especially because I did get to do a study with my husband, Lee, who was a physicist, and ran an institute, a material science institute, and I worked in that capacity, and a very, very different subject group. But people are people, animals are animals, and we all adhere to the laws of behavior. Sure do.
Andy, Beth has shared her vast knowledge of ABA with the clinical team at Pyramid and has helped shape the PECS implementer certification process with Lori Cross. What have you gained from your collaborations with Beth over the years?
Well, again, most sort of clever solutions start with interesting problems, and our interesting problem was we were doing workshops, around the United States, and we started to do it internationally, and we would get a phone call from a school district in, South Dakota saying, Raina came to a 2-day workshop, so she's our PECS expert in our district. So we want you to sign something that'll, tell the parents that she's the expert. And we would kind of go, I'll sign a thing saying Raina was there for 2 days, but I have absolutely no idea what Raina could do because she was sitting there for 2 days. So we realized we needed a behavioral process that would have people demonstrate particular skills, not just paper and pencil skills, but the actual teaching skills. And Lori really started working with Beth and trying to pinpoint what were the skills that we could allow people to talk about, write about, versus what were the skills that they really needed to demonstrate. Then there were issues like, well, demonstrate at what level, over how many trials and how many experiences, and how do you give feedback when somebody doesn't do it correctly. So it was really this back and forth process with then trying it out in the real world, getting feedback from people in the real world, going back to Beth and saying, okay, so this is what we learned from the first round. And then it's this ultimate shaping process, so that now the certification process is available to people around the world, so that they can come and demonstrate their initial skills. And we've expanded upon that so that can not only demonstrate their ability to do the steps with kids, but how to supervise people. How do you give other people feedback on whether they're doing something well? And Beth has had a major impact on how to give feedback as well. Beth and I, for several years, did workshops at ABBA. And remember, Beth, we thought it was going to be really simple because everybody would know how to do it. And we said, wow, they don't. So it was this very interesting experience where people who were learning the principles of behavior analysis still had to learn how to give realistic, humane, helpful feedback to other professionals about their performance. And again, we followed a lot of Beth's guidelines, we integrated that into our process, so that to this day, Joanne knows that all of our consultants around the world are taught how to give feedback, and much of it is based on what Beth shared with us.
That's good to know. Very good.
Okay, so these are for both of you. How has the field of ABA changed over the years?
Oh my goodness. From one journal publishing papers on behavior analysis to perhaps hundreds. Perhaps hundreds. It would be not too far-fetched to say that. I haven't kept up in the last couple of years, but it was just growing so exponentially. And that's a really good thing, as long as they're teaching ethical behavior.
Right. And it's nice to see duplications of studies too. Because, sure. So the more people that are doing research, I think that really helps us application of things. Andy?
Well, yeah, I totally agree. If you will, it's hard to keep up with the literature, both the applied literature and the experimental literature. I think probably the applied literature has expanded exponentially, whereas the experimental has grown, but it's not quite the crazy pace of the applied world. One of the things which has changed, though, since I got in the field, when I got in the field, I think the rate of autism was, I think it was 1.5 per 10,000. And the more recent figures in New Jersey were 1 in 55. And so everyone now knows autism. Everybody knows a family that's been impacted by autism. So that has changed, which has also changed by putting tremendous pressure on educational systems, therapeutic systems, and providing services. My first experience was in a public school setting. And so we were trying to do a lot of work trying to show what public schools could do, that you could provide real high quality services within a public school setting. But that public school setting had to have the financial resources to be able to hire adequate staff in terms of numbers and get them training. And Delaware was committed to doing that. What I've seen change is that many other states have not gone down that path. So there's been tremendous influence in the last several years in getting families insurance support for providing services. But some of that is outside of the school setting, some of that is inside of the school setting. So now I think, Beth, I'm sure you're aware that the amount of money that is now available in autism services is, amazing to us, because when we were getting a master's degree on the way to a PhD, we didn't think of stopping along the way and getting a really good job at a high salary. There were no really good jobs at high salaries at that point. But now there are. So now there's a lot of economic pressure. And I don't think that's always, if you will, a good thing in terms of improving quality, because that was kind of economic pressures, I think, putting too much pressure on quantity, how much can you do, as opposed to how well can you do it. So I'm not sure what, if Beth was seeing the same thing or interacts in the same way. So what do you think, Beth? Do you think money has changed things in any way?
Well, I think your description of the growing recognition of need is certainly there, and probably has gotten to a level where it just is realistic. But there are things that we can do about that, and the programmed instruction via TV, consulting on the internet. There are a number of different strategies that can be used to work with people, to train them to do this job. It's got to reach a level where it can't be sustained. And I think what you're saying is that it's probably not far from there. You're taking money away from the other kids, and the bright, the smart kids are being shortchanged. The kids who are average are being shortchanged by this. So this is a philosophical question as well as an ethical question and a technological question. I think that we need to keep going, the field should be going in the direction of finding ways to use effective teaching behavioral technology in a more economical way. We need group instruction. Well, for example, we had done a project, a couple multi-year project on training teachers of children with autism via the internet, and that was very, very satisfactory experience, because it was data-based, and they did send us videos and data and so forth. I don't know that program has been, it probably didn't have anyone advocating for selling it more widely, but programs like that I think are essential, because funds are limited, and sooner or later you get to the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Well, I think you touched on our next two questions, which are about how you would describe the current state of special education and the role of ABA, and also where you would like to see the field of applied behavior analysis go in the future. If you have anything else to add.
Well, I'll say that from part of what I've seen is that in special education, the behavior specialist on the team, they're often viewed as what I call the hit person. Joanne's hitting her head, go do something. And so behavior analysts, whether they're formally credentialed or not, are very often thought of as, oh, that's the person to bring in. When somebody's having a problem, that person will get rid of the problem. And what our field knows is that we don't get rid of behavior. We don't get rid of problems. We replace them. And we're good at really teaching skills. And those new skills will replace the stuff that we're not so fond of seeing. But I don't think we've done a good enough job to sell that perspective. So that's something that I would like to continue to see shift. This is true. When I was in graduate school, and this is like 1971, in North Carolina, I walked into a classroom to help a teacher, and she looked at me and she said, well, you teach him to sit in the chair, I'll teach him how to read. As if this was two completely different worlds, that she knew the world of how to teach reading, but I knew how to teach sitting. Mm-hmm. And it's still this many years later that we have not convinced enough of the world, the special education world, the regular education world, that teaching is for everything. There is no separate world of, rid of this and teach that. So I would somehow, I wish we as a field could figure out how to better describe what we can do, which is help teachers, speech pathologists, OTs, adaptive physical education teachers. We can teach them to do what they want to do better.
But I would like to see children and young people learn about laws of behavior. Goodness, if they can learn about laws of biology, and this is in good part of biology that we're talking about, I think that could make a tremendous contribution. I think all teachers, I think all managers, I think all leaders need to know the laws of behavior.
And that kind of segues into the next question about what advice would you give to those who are just beginning their careers in the academic or clinical field of ABA?
Well, listen, your audience, find out where they are, what their skills are, and their knowledge base is, find out what their hopes and dreams are, build that in because those are their reinforcers, and package those in some way. I'll give you a small example. At the University of Massachusetts, I had a program supported by the Office of Special Education, Developmental Disabilities, and we had 8 or 10 doctoral candidates. They need reinforcement just like everybody else does. And with their agreement, we had a chart on the wall. We had each little step that started and brought them to their doctorate, the courses they took, the seminars they attended, et cetera, et cetera. And whenever they completed one of those, they would tell me and tell one another about it. Now, will sound really strange to you. I had a little rubber stamp with a feet on it. And when they came in and reported or gave evidence that they had completed one of those, they put their hand out and I put those feet on there.
They wanted the stamp.
They wanted the stamp. They ran out and showed it to everybody. And it was powerfully motivating.
Yeah.
Because what it did was harness the reinforcement from all their peers and their families and so forth.
And then the visual, I'm sure, helped as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The first thing anyone did when they came in my office, I mean, anyway, the students and the faculty would be to look at the chart to see how people were coming.
I think for me, part of the issue is, with all the training for master's level people or, doctoral level, that I would literally not let anybody out the door if they could not describe a case with all the clinical, technical precision that we can have, and then turn to mom and dad and tell them exactly the same thing without one of those terms. That you have to be able to adjust your language to the audience. Skinner was clear about that. It's the audience that defines whether you're successfully engaged in communication. It's not how eloquent you think you are, it's whether it's effective. And I think we need to focus a lot of attention so that we can talk to, whether it's absolutely non-professionals like parents and siblings, or other professionals like school psychologists or speech pathologists. We need to adjust how we send messages. We can't, stand in front of a group and say, you need to learn our terminology because our terminology is the key. It's not the key. The terminology is just descriptive of the analysis, if you will. And so I think we, as we mature as a field, we will have to keep improving. How do we let other people know the benefits of behavior analysis?
I think that's where my own experience in working in the school system really paid off, because I did learn, first off, how to talk to parents and children. But then later on, I learned how to talk to fellow scientists. And those are two very separate languages.
Yes.
You've got to reinforce them by attending to what they're looking for and getting acceptable answers.
Mm-hmm. You want to ask the final question, Raina?
Sure. Yeah. So just to wrap this up, what would you say stands out to you the most about Beth and your work together?
Well, I think Beth is, to me, combines this, brilliant analytic mind with practicality. That she could, analyze something in incredible great detail, and yet remember that we're in the real world and it's got to be practical. And, somebody's going to tie shoes and eat some food and do some things that are really, really, on one level simple but essential. So it was this combination of paying attention to the essential things, but be able to analyze it in incredible detail. So that's what I always thank Beth for.
Good. So what stands out for you about Andy and your work together?
Oh, Andy is so creative. And Lori, the picture exchange is a terrific example. If it doesn't work, you have to find another way. And you found the other way, or the other ways. And I think you're continually looking. I hope you are. I presume you are looking ways to find, to support your students or your clients' progress. On the reinforcement side, that's been brilliant. On the input side, that's been brilliant, breaking things down, using laws of effective reinforcement. Many of those different guidelines that we've learned from the scientific study of human behavior. Mm-hmm. That's what attracted me to your program, Andy. It was the science of human behavior in motion. Effective. You had the data to show it.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions or thoughts?
want to thank you. Joanne, I want to thank you for driving down to help us do this. Beth, it's wonderful that you gave us this time to talk to you. And I think it's great. Hope some people who haven't known about your influence will now learn more about it and read more of your work.